we had just finished the part. Well, this we're jumping ahead into review here now. So you all add the content that you deem most valuable here.
Finish the part.
But what we had done is finish the part where Solomon prayed for the grace of wisdom, and God said, okay, I'm going to give you wisdom. And so, so we had a decent discussion about wisdom generally and Solomon's wisdom. And that's really about all we did. Again, those of you who are joining us post-conversation between the fever and the bad internet connection I had, we didn't get very far last week. My apologies for that. We'll try to make up some ground today. And First Kings will eventually give us the opportunity to make up a lot of ground because there will be some minutia that we can fly past pretty quickly over time. Is there anything else that anybody else found really valuable that you want to make sure we have the chance to discuss?
I enjoyed the review of the baby and the wisdom and the splitting the baby story, which I hadn't looked at for a long time.
Yeah, we'll
And
definitely do that today.
First time I noticed that it's two prostitutes. I always thought it was two women. So then my thought was, why did this editor want to make that point when really the point was about the love for the child?
Right.
Like that, like the lowest that a woman could go, even though women were pretty low to begin with. Would that be your take?
I'm not so sure about that. Well, but we haven't actually read that together. So we'll read that here in a minute. And,
Oh, I thought we did. I guess I did. I ran ahead.
Maybe y'all did, and I just didn't know it. Because again, there's no telling what.
No telling about last week.
Yeah.
What happened last week stays last week.
That's right. That's exactly right. So yeah, well, let's read those texts and then let's discuss, because there are some conventions that we can take a look at, but really it's one of those stories, like so many other stories, where we should take a look and say, okay, here are two unnamed women who are being used as pawns in the story a little bit. What's going on? And lift up their stories a little bit. And yeah, and that they are called prostitutes has got to be of some value in this from the narrator's perspective anyway. Anything else that anybody needs to know before we jump in? And we'll go just straight to that part of the text. I'm hearing nothing, so let's do that. Pull up chapter 3. Always love that it shows you the ads that I'm being targeted for. I took my window apart in my isolation room and have been looking for parts to fix my window. So Swissco is following me around the internet these days. Oh Lord, it's like confession at the beginning of every class. Let's see, verse 16. That's where we'll pick back up. Chapter 3, verse 16.
Here are prostitutes.
Here they are. Later, two women who were prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, "Please, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then on the third day after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth. We were together. There was no one else with us in the house. Only the two of us were in the house. Then this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. She got up in the middle of the night and took my son from beside me while your servant slept. She laid him at her breast and laid her dead son at my breast. When I rose in the morning to nurse my son, I saw that he was dead, but when I looked at him closely in the morning, clearly it was not the son that I had born." But the other woman said, "No, the living son is mine and the dead son is yours." The first said, "No, the dead son is yours and the living son is mine." And so they argued before the king. Then the king said, "The one says, 'This is my son that is alive and your son is dead,' while the other says, 'Not so, your son is dead and my son is the living one.' So the king said, 'Bring me a sword.' And they brought a sword before the king. The king said, 'Divide the living boy in two, then give half to the one and half to the other.' But the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because compassion for her son burned within her, 'Please, my lord, give her the living boy. Certainly do not kill him.' The other said, 'It shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide it.' Then the king responded, 'Give the first woman the living boy. Do not kill him. She is his mother.' All Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, And they stood in awe of the king because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to execute justice. What do you think?
I take it this is an expansion of our dialogue on wisdom. I noticed going back to this concept of wisdom that Solomon communicates with God in this dream. And he asks for two things, it seems like, in this dream. He asks that he rules with justice, and that he can discriminate the difference between goodness and evil, good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he asked for. And God's reply is, you asked for wisdom. So at least in a very limited sense, we're already launched on this discussion that at least God's reply would say wisdom does include justice and being able to differentiate between good and bad. And I am still, wisdom is so multi-layered. There's certainly a utilitarian wisdom, the so-called doing the right thing that gives you success in this temporal world. But wisdom literature apparently goes way beyond that. So I think this discussion needs to be expanded. What I see here, would this be sort of just a utilitarian wisdom at this level?
Yeah, so let's talk about a couple of different topics that you raised. And first, acknowledge, yes, what the intention, I think, of this story is to quickly demonstrate the wisdom that God has given to Solomon. So I do think they're correlated in that way. As we'll see as we turn to the next chapter, it's not like this flows in any kind of narrative pattern that's supposed to be anything other than like, here is almost a parable to demonstrate what the preceding portion of this chapter was doing. So last week we talked a little bit about wisdom as being that which accords an understanding of the patterns that God used to form the universe, or to establish order out of chaos. That would be another way of talking about that. So what is the order? What is the pattern that God uses? And whatever that is, acting in accordance with it is considered wise. And we can, by extension, say is just. If God does what God does in the formation of the universe according to the sort of perfect standard, then what is not just is that which is not in alignment with God's purpose, will, order. That which is just is aligned with God's established order. And so, so just as a basic concept, that will carry you through the prophets and other things. When the prophets say that there's injustice, when the prophets say that there is something wrong, it's not so much that they're saying that there's something wrong simply from a legal standpoint. What they're saying is that there's something wrong from the standpoint of alignment with God's purpose or God's order, or God's will, and that's what needs to be set back to right, and that ultimately that is often a very painful experience. Utilitarianism and well, let's just sort of say wisdom as it relates to philosophy, the love of wisdom. In the biblical mindset, there is this movement, I wouldn't necessarily say back and forth, but there is some sense of movement toward the idea that humanity can understand God's order, God's perfect will, and if we act in accordance with that, then we act in the most ethical, just, upright way. And wisdom literature is born out of an attempt to define what that would look like. And so like the Proverbs are a great example. If we go back and look at the Proverbs, there's plenty of stuff in there that you might disagree with and say, oh gosh, that's just not the world that we live in anymore, or something like that. And it's contextual. At the same time, the author of Proverbs is trying to say, here's the order for the universe. And if that is the order for the universe, then this is what good behavior looks like. which is what every philosopher, every ethicist has ever tried to do. And so utilitarianism is an example of that. That the right action is that action which results in the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And that if we can just do that, then we'll always choose the right action, even if it doesn't feel right. And that is a foreign concept to the biblical world, for sure. But every now and then, I do think we get into these positions where there is the same notion that apart from the law, let's say, there is a right, a good choice, the correct choice that may not always feel correct, and we have to do it anyway. And I think in that way, there's some similarities. A question that I would pose back to the group, and then I want to get to Landon and Louise, is
So how would the book of Job fall into this concept?
yeah, I'll get to there in just one second. So the question back to the group is really about Solomon and whether or not Solomon's actions are designed to promote an ethic or promote ethics, or are they designed to discern? And we can take a look at that. Job fits in as wisdom literature in my perspective because it attempts to describe the universe as it is, and to discuss what righteous behavior looks like in the face of bad things happening to a good person. So it's more than just wisdom literature, but that's why we would consider it wisdom literature, just trying to describe the world as it is. Okay, Landon and then Louise.
I know I was struck more by the women actually in this portion, in that how I felt like how much they really displayed just human nature, and that we need to have the experience to have compassion of the two women, and just kind of like the human nature of, I guess, jealousy in there. And if we don't have the direct experience, it's hard for us to actually have compassion for each other. And I don't know, I say that a lot today. And so I was just really struck by that in the two women there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've certainly been guilty of the type of view of this that doesn't pay enough attention to their humanity. And it's really good to go back and look at these. They are characters in a parable at some level. And yeah, they're not at all. And getting in touch with their emotional state alone is something we ought to do and very often skip over. Thank you for that, Landon. Louise?
I was struck by kind of a basic question, and that is the word utilitarian, or that started it. I realize there are a lot of people that can be termed wise that have nothing to do, at least outwardly, or express that it comes from God. So my question was, in my mind, is there a difference? First of all, are there two types of wisdom? One, an earthly human wisdom, and the other, a divine wisdom? And I'm guessing yes, but I'm throwing that out there. The reason I see in this story is that if godly wisdom is a gift from God, that there's something required of us, and that's discernment. We can't just say, oh, I know God knows me, I'm wise. Well, no, maybe not. Right. So discernment jumped out, and I think Landon mentioned discernment as well. So maybe that's part of it. But then the second part of divine wisdom, I really think, is based in love, because what jumped out after Solomon discerned the different behaviors and the words of the two women, how did he make his decision in the end? It was, clearly the one who had love for the child, whether it was hers or not, was the mother, because she would rather see her child alive with the wrong person than dead for both of them. So that was love. So how does this all go together, people out there, in your minds? Are there two different kinds of wisdom, and then what do we put in which column? That's
great,
it.
Steve. Very, very good. And yeah, just to expand the topic and make sure that everybody's looking at it more comprehensively as we move into the New Testament, we have repeated conversations basically about how foolish God or love or Jesus seem according to the standards of the world, right? The cross is a stumbling block to the wise, and so whatever the notion is that is popular conception of wisdom at the time, what the God who is love does in the person of Jesus is an affront to people's concept of wisdom. So yeah, that's a good. Are there two different wisdoms? How do we synthesize all this? A great question, Catherine.
And just real quick, I was going to say, it makes me think of other stories in scripture where you have some kind of absurd, perverse thing that's, proposed that isn't going to happen, but pushes you to kind of the brink of reality. Like, it kind of makes me think of Abraham and Isaac or other stories like that, which in that case, he didn't choose the compassionate thing. So I don't know. I think it's fascinating to kind of look at those things and kind of, especially in terms of the conversation around wisdom, like what's reasonable, what's, what makes sense, and often it's like you get to the wisdom through like the absurdity of something really perverse and unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that way, I say this is a parable, not because I think that it's necessarily a fictional story, whether or not it was, but because it has that kind of function. It really has the ability to strip away all the crud and almost make it more poignant because of how absurd it is. I think it's a great way of talking about it. There's a philosopher whose name is escaping me right now completely, that tries to push philosophy into those places where you look at one example and you make your choice about what is correct or whatever in that example, and then it pushes that example into the absurd, and then you realize whatever it is you're intended to realize from it. I'll come up with it in a little bit, but that's a really, really good point. Really good point. All right, I see Landon's hand and then Andy.
Yeah, just really quick, kind of on that wisdom idea. My one quick thought was, and maybe this is Luis where you were going, but it's almost like it's the wisdom we know and the wisdom we don't know that we're seeking, almost. And then as we continually go about, we continue to learn, and we kind of get that from these stories. It almost seems like as we go along too.
I like that. The wisdom we know, the wisdom we don't know. And that pushed me to say something about what Catherine said, which expanded in my mind the idea. She was talking about pushing to the absurd and then going through to wisdom, pushing through. And that had me thinking about the concept of cognitive dissonance as a knowledge thing. You think you believe something, somebody throws up something that makes you sort of shake up the knowledge you had, and you learn something. So could wisdom be kind of a spiritual dissonance that happens? A soul looking at something from a spiritual perspective that sort of shakes them up. This is not, what was in the realm of possibility for me spiritually, and it shakes you up, and you push through to something that is a godly wisdom. I mean, that I believe that would be a divine wisdom pushing through.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's why Jesus teaches the way that Jesus teaches, is to make that shake up happen, move us to paradoxical and parabolic thinking, and really just for the fun of it. If you ever want to go and do studies about what's happening in the different centers of the brain when those things happen, there are really great studies out there. There's this is a Bible class. I won't get too far into it, but really amazing how how different parts of the brain try to govern each other and how they need to be freed at some level in order to move into a different way of thinking, and how you can basically prime that. They've done these studies where they'll run the same set of questions but before those questions, they'll have people move into a state of sadness, or they'll have people do complex math problems or whatever. And then they'll ask the same set of questions, and people's likelihood to answer those questions in a certain way is affected by their emotional state, or how much higher level thinking they've been doing ahead of that, or whatever the case may be. And so you can really start to get a strong sense of, for those of us who would consider ourselves disciples, who pursue the discipline of thinking in that way, how it is that we are attempting to govern our rational principles, our emotional principles, our ethics in a way that is defined differently than it would be otherwise, right? It's kind of cool. It's kind of cool. All right, Andy, and then Scott.
I was just struck by the phrase where her bowels were moved upon her child, and that like caused her to say what she said. And to me, that was more like a reaffirmation that God is everywhere and in everything. And I think wisdom a lot in the world, you know, whatever it is, there's always two sides in the world. I mean, everything is pretty much a toss-up in the world. You can always find people on both sides of the equation that are very convincing and persuasive. But at least I found when the patience and the contemplation comes from within, you know, it tends to make a better decision for me. And then when I'm impulsive and not in a presence with God, then it doesn't turn out as well.
Yeah, very nice. I like it. All right, Scott.
Yeah, I guess my comment turns out to sort of follow on to Andy's. With something like wisdom or justice, is who says so? I mean, who says it's wise? I think there are some things that you can certainly witness, like this woman deciding to let the child live. I mean, that's clearly a woman who loved life, because she didn't want to see a child die, regardless of whose it was. But this whole business of, yeah, that's wise or that's just, is to say, well, really? I think that's stupid or frivolous or unfair, or,
right.
You know, so I don't, maybe I'm too shallow to get to understand that. But I mean, to me, it's just a jump ball, like Andy said. I mean, you can find half people to say that that's stupid as you can to say it's wise.
Right. It's good. And yeah, we always have to remember that, well, never mind. I won't. I'm not even going to get that. All right. So yes, we have questions about. We could almost say this is a question about moral relativism. How does one determine what is wise, what is good, what is just, what the appropriate ethical standard is? And from my perspective, ultimately, it has to boil down into a choice. And that is where, just to pull us back toward our text, that's very much where I think the Deuteronomist would want us to take a look, is that every single person at some level is given the choice of whether or not to choose to follow in relationship and according to the standards of God. Now, I have a fairly skeptical view about our capacity to do that, and I have a fairly skeptical view about our capacity to even discern what God's will is at all times. And to that end, that's why I'm saying go back and look at Proverbs, which is supposed to be a compendium of ethics for biblically minded people, and half of it makes me want to gag. It's not the way I want to order my life necessarily, and that is from at least one portion of the Bible's perspective, exactly how I should be leading my life. And so, you know, I wouldn't say that it's, let me say it this way. I think that at a larger level, the Bible tries to show us that it's not so easy to determine. And here is Solomon, I think almost gift wraps to us as an example of this. Solomon, with all of his wisdom, is he even good? I think we have to take a look at that. So then, just for the sake of it, we're really left back in a question of saying, well, then how are we going to determine what is the right course of action? How are we going to determine what is good? And and knowing that it is a choice, there are, I think, ways that we can subordinate ourselves to love, to the concept of love, to the love known in Jesus. I think that that's for Christians, I think, a particularly important way of viewing that, but also not the only way of viewing that. And there we would move into moral philosophy in a way that we don't have time for today, but I think is a valuable conversation about, is there something else? And when we say love, what does love even mean? How do we enact it? And it's a fruitful conversations. I don't mean to dismiss them at all. Just know that we can only go so far. Louise.
Yeah, it's hard to express this, but this question that Scott made about how do we know what's true, what's just. Being a former educator, of course, I'm always linking the mind and the spirit, and I think we've been talking about the wisdom of the mind or knowledge, and then we're also talking at a deeper level about the wisdom of our spirit. So how do we, in education, the way I truly believe people grow in knowledge is by batting it around like we're doing now. And so be it if there's a cognitive dissonance, somebody says something that either I've never thought of or I actually think is wrong. That creates whatever that dynamic you talked about in the mind with cognitive dissonance. I think it creates a similar type of, well, I have to settle this in my soul. I have to understand what's right, what's true, what's just. And so I think one of the best ways, at least for me, to know what's true and right and just is to go both with my mind, but more with my spirit into conversation with others who are willing to discuss these topics. And that's why I just love, any kind of I see this as like a Christian midrash we have here. Right. Batting it around, talking about what we believe and what we don't believe, adding a new little spin on something we thought we knew already. Mm-hmm. And I believe that's one of the most powerful ways that God speaks to us is through each other, knowing that we're all committed to learning what is the way of the Spirit, as opposed to just the way of humanity. So at least we're one step ahead of getting a spiritual dissonance settled in the way that God is leading us. If we do it together, if I sit in my room, I can only get so far.
Yeah, I think that's great.
So thank you all. I mean, I just find these conversations just fascinating.
Thank you, Louise. A couple, things to give consideration to. One is that as we have these conversations, we build systems, not just individual thoughts that stand alone, but we end up building systems. And as we hold the systems, that's really a pathway toward not only deeper understanding, but new ways of acting. And so you end up with a lot of contingencies within the system. I would 100% agree, Louise, that we were built for community, designed for community. And so our access to wisdom, as well as our access to love, is rooted in community. It's rooted in life with each other. It can't be done in isolation. So that's a truth claim that I would make. And it's based on my understanding of scripture and other forms of revelation, including science and other disciplines. But once I make that truth claim, now there are a dozen other contingent truth claims that I either make or don't make based on that one concept. And we'll never quite be perfect. Like, we put our finger in the dam over here and water starts shooting out harder on the other side of the dam. But at the same time, we come to a place where we can make a choice as to which parts of the system we can hold that makes sense to us. The unexamined life never makes the choice, never chooses which things to hold, and as a result gets batted around a good bit in a way that at least I find it difficult to manage. So I do, yeah, I not only love the notions that you're bringing up, but also agree with them, and that's part of the reason I find so much value in this discipline. Okay, Andy, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, just one follow-up. In this example with wisdom, it's basically the evil and the good are at a standstill. But I think it's interesting in the world, a lot of time, evil knows no limits. You know, it'll keep going. And then, you know, served it, but I heard it from 3 independent sources with no axe to grind, then you could discern that it was true. So I think evil, notwithstanding the things that happen as it comes to for itself, is that I think it comes because nature, it wants to in a way it's
Andy, I'm sorry, we haven't been able to hear, or at least I haven't. I'm based off the videos of other people, we haven't been able to hear you at all. Something, just trying to read between the lines, something that we may give some consideration to is that the apparatus we have for determining what is true, the apparatus that we have for determining what is right, may at the one either be an imperfect apparatus or 2 have been designed to work in an environment in which we are no longer habitating. You know, if our apparatus, from an evolutionary perspective, if our apparatus was designed to determine what is true in a very small, geographically isolated tribal system, it makes sense then that it stopped working for us, right? And from a biblical standpoint, if our apparatus was designed to work in a relatively small family system in a garden in paradise with our Creator, not shocking that it didn't work on the other side of the gates. And so I think we have a lot of different ways to talk about that, but I do think we have to approach with a high degree of humility, the power or lack thereof of our truth discerning apparatus to work for us at all times and in all situations. Wish it were not so, but very much believe. Ironically, I believe that that's true, and so I can't. My truth apparatus may be wrong in determining that that's true, but it's something that I hold to be true. Okay, let's get back to the text really quickly. We're deep down this rabbit hole, which is good, and yet at the same time we're several chapters behind already. We're going to run ahead real quick. King Solomon was king over all Israel. These were his high officials. Azariah, son of Zadok, was the priest. Elihareph and Ahijah, sons of Shisha, were secretaries. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was recorder. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was in command of the army. Zadok and Abiathar were priests. Azariah, son of Nathan, was over the officials. Zabud, son of Nathan, was priest and king's friend. Ahishar was in charge of the palace. Adoniram, son of Abda, was in charge of the forced labor. Just to return to our earlier conversation, just to prime the conversation a little bit more, here is wisdom and all all of its glory embodied in Solomon, who has a marriage alliance with Pharaoh and has somebody in charge of his slaves. Just, put a little asterisk there as we go forward. Solomon had 12 officials over all Israel who provided food for the king and for his household. Each one had to make provisions for 1 month in the year. These were their names: Ben-Hur in the hill country of Ephraim, Ben-Decker in Makaz, Shalbim, Beth-Shemesh, and Elon Beth-Hanan, Ben-Hesed in Aruboth. To him belongs Soko and all the land of Hefer. Ben Abinadab in all Naphath Dor, he and Taphath, Solomon's daughter, as his wife. Benah, son of Ahilud, in Tanakh, Megiddo, and all Beth-Shean, which is beside Zarethan below Jezreel. And from Beth-Shean to Abel-Maholah, as far as the other side of Jokmeam. Ben Gaber in Ramoth Gilead, he had the villages of Jair, son of Manasseh, which are in Gilead. And he had the region of Argob, which is in Bashan, 60 great cities with walls and bronze bars. Ahinadab, son of Iddo in Mahanaim, Ahimaaz in Naphtali. He had taken Basemath, Solomon's daughter, as his wife. Benah, son of Hushai in Asher, in Bealoth. Jehoshaphat, son of Peruah in Issachar. Shimei, son of Elah in Benjamin. Gaber, son of Uri in the land of Gilead, the country of King Sihon of the Amorites and King Og of Bashan. There was one official in the land of Judah. Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand by the sea. They ate and drank and were happy. Solomon was sovereign over all the kingdoms of the Euphrates, to the land of the Philistines, even to the border of Egypt. They brought tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Solomon's provision for one day was 30 cores. That's a lot. That's tons and tons and tons of flour, 60 cores of meal, 10 fat oxen, 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and fatted fowl. For he had dominion over all the region west of the Euphrates, from Tifsah to Gaza, over all the kings west of the Euphrates, and he had peace on all sides. During Solomon's lifetime, Judah and Israel lived in safety, from Dan even to Beersheba, all of them under their vines and fig trees. Solomon also had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots, 12,000 horsemen. Those officials supplied provisions for King Solomon and for all who came to King Solomon's table, each one in his month. They let nothing be lacking. They also brought to the required place barley and straw for the horses and swift steeds, each according to his charge. God gave Solomon very great wisdom, discernment, and breadth of understanding as vast as the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. It was wiser than anyone else, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite and Heman, Calcol, and Darda, children of Mahol. Its fame spread throughout all the surrounding nations. He composed 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He would speak of trees, from the cedar that is in Lebanon to the hyssop that grows in the wall. He would speak of animals and birds and reptiles and fish. People came from all the nations to hear the wisdom of Solomon. They came from all the kings of the earth who had heard of his wisdom. All right. What'd you notice?
Well, it's sort of like that comment in The Wizard of Oz.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I say it's a little bit like Dorothy's comment in The Wizard of Oz. This sure ain't Kansas. If you look at the transition of what has happened here from the Confederacy and Judges, it's astounding. And some of the stuff that when God was sort of saying, if you go for a kingdom, think of the things you're going to get, like taxes. They use the word tribute here, which is the same thing. Forced labor, but that's really conscription. Solomon obviously needs labor, cheap labor for his building project. So there had to be some sort of conscription. The size of his court is astounding.
Right.
It's Oriental, how do you pronounce the word? Satrapy or something.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, so and really, really important to call us back to the promise that God makes that if you get a king, you're also going to get conscription. You're going to get military draft. Basically, you're going to have taxes, and there were in the same conversation way back there in Samuel. Kings aren't supposed to have horses, right? Like the people aren't supposed to get horses and chariots. That's what empires do. That's not what the Israelites were supposed to do. And here, over in First Kings, we have Solomon with a whole lot of horses and chariots. So it doesn't always. Unfortunately, there's not enough, to me, ease at which it tells us sometimes, hey, remember that time I told you? But instead, we're supposed to be students that see this sort of thing. So good for you for seeing it, and for us for seeing it together. That this is a case is being built against Solomon at some level here. Right? Good. Yeah, Louise.
Not to go too far back into wisdom, but what I noticed with this short last paragraph is that it says that God gave Solomon immense wisdom and understanding and a heart as vast as the sand on the seashore. So I'm thinking, this is only what I'm thinking, that this writer is aware that the type of wisdom that they talk about, which he goes later to talk about, and that kind of wisdom is basically, I'm smarter than anybody else around, or Solomon is, and I can write poems and I can do this, and all of it, I can name all the plants and the fish and the reptiles. That to me is head knowledge.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of tipping the balance there so that I was confused, but then I went back and I said, oh, but they added understanding and a heart. And this is not like a cardiac issue. This is love. So that I had to twist it to sort of make it fit our discussion before about love and discernment. So I'm seeing that discernment in the form of understanding, and a heart as vast as the sand on the seashore is a symbol for love. So I'm not left with my original thought that, hey, he's talking about, or the writer's talking about Solomon being wiser than anybody else around and has a lot of book mental knowledge, but there is that little out. I don't know whether anybody else felt when they were talking about what the wisdom of Solomon looked like. It seemed like head knowledge to me.
So a lot in there. I want to go. The heart for understanding is really helpful. The translation that I gave to you was the NRSV. God gave Solomon a very great wisdom, discernment, and breadth of understanding. But it really is heart. It's lave in Hebrew. It's and remember that heart, like you said, heart's not the beating thing in the chest. Heart is mind or center of understanding. And in the biblical concept, it's somewhere in your gut, somewhere between your belly button and your sternum. And so it's really, really, really good to take a look at that. I want to go back to the question that you had, and Louise, you would be better to say the question then again one time, which is related to what is the author trying to draw us to. And then I just, after you do that, I have a follow-up question about the purpose of the writing. So will you say the question one more time?
Good luck at me remembering my question. I think it was just the author. At first, it seemed to me that the author was just talking about human wisdom, smartness. And I had to go back and look at God gave Solomon immense wisdom and understanding and a heart, so that I wasn't stopped at that solely mental wisdom.
Yeah.
So I wondered what other people thought, and was that enough expansion talking about understanding and love to make everybody else happy?
Great, good, good. All right, others, what do you think about that? Well, I will say, seeing nobody, I think Hutch maybe has his hand up for another topic.
This is another topic. You can
Yeah,
explore this some more.
So I'll bite. For me, this is part of the secondary question that I have. For me, it's really helpful to see that there is a lave, that it is head understanding that he is this Renaissance man who can understand nature and so on and so forth. But he also has this breadth of understanding that's rooted in that center of himself between his navel and his sternum. But it then pushes even further for me on God's given him all this, and I think he's squandering it at some level. I think there's a mess that's unfolding here. And so for me, that starts to lean a little bit on the purpose of the author writing some of this. And yeah, I don't know. That's just my.
You mean it was purposeful that he say God gave him these three gifts, but just focused on the one as though that was where Solomon was going?
And not necessarily, but more, I think that to increase our understanding that there's nobody that's before or after who's had as much command, according to the author, as Solomon over trees and animals and everything else in the created universe, and also this incredible heart for understanding. And yet, look, still, he is building an empire, because that's what human hearts and minds will do when given unmitigated power and authority. I think that there's a condemnation that is a subtext, but I could be wrong, and it's early in the text to determine that. And I also will say that, like so many other things, we have a celebration of Solomon that gets lifted up over and over and over again, regardless of what he does. Solomon's a great king, like David. David will just get celebrated and celebrated and celebrated. And so there's this kind of minority report that gets layered in from time to time that says he was also a habitual monster. And we need to take a look at that. And so I'm fruit doesn't fall far from the tree, so to speak. I wonder if there's not that same subtext layered in here to help us see nobody's been given a greater gift than Solomon. And look what he's doing with it. Okay, Hutch.
Go back to a statement here, but as we look at this, how is God's purpose for mankind being realized? And we see it evolving through tribes and then a confederation, maybe a kingdom, something else. And in leading up to this, we see this conflict of at least confederation versus kingdom. But this opening verses of chapter 4 seem to very strongly celebrate the emergence of the kingdom. And in around verse 20, we almost see the fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant in this kingdom. God promised Abraham provision or protection and property, land, and descendants. And if you look at verse 20, Judah and Israel were like the sand of the sea in number. That's what God said to Abraham. They ate and drank happily. And here you have these fractious, stiff-necked people with their land, numbers beyond the sand of the sea, and they're living well. The kingdom works.
Yeah. So the question may be, what was the purpose of that blessing that God gave to Abraham? And is that the fruit of that blessing given to Abraham is that coming to fruition? Or are we only halfway there? What do you think, Hutch? Why did God bless Abraham?
Say that louder.
Why did God bless Abraham?
How odd of God to choose the Jews. We don't know.
Yeah. Anybody? Yeah, Jane. You're muted.
Okay.
There you go.
I learned a godly place because Abraham believed in only one God, and he would go out to the desert and try to communicate with the only one God.
Okay, so this is why Abraham maybe was selected. But what was the purpose for the blessing? It wasn't just like, hey, thanks for the shout out in the desert, so I'm going to give you children more numerous than the stars in the heavens. Why?
He's a faithful guy.
All
Yeah.
right. Catherine?
Was it to establish a new covenant with the people?
Yes, but even there, I would say, and why? What's the end? What's the telos of this interaction between God and the family of Abraham, or the descendants of Abraham, or the people, however we want to describe that? What's the telos? The end from
To build the kingdom of God, to build a kingdom of God.
Yeah, good. There's specific Genesis language that I'm looking for, but yes, that's a way of talking about it. I'm gonna leave y'all hanging on this. We've only got 6 minutes. Somebody's gonna find it.
Good Genesis.
Not enough time to look back at Genesis, is there?
Yeah, there is.
Oh, maybe.
Let's see.
Show God's dominion over all the earth.
All right, how about this? Somebody tell me where I'm going in Genesis to find this story.
Hmm.
Oh, sorry. That too fast. You didn't see that.
Uh, 12.
Well, very good. So just, yeah, if you ever want to like lock down a place in Genesis, everything prior to chapter 12 are the primordial stories, the stories of the flood, the stories of the first people, people groups, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the Tower of Babel. Chapter 12, that's Abraham's calling.
Remington,
Yes, sir, Bob.
my Bible refers you to Genesis chapter 13, verse 16 through 22.
For the blessing of Abraham.
Yes.
Okay.
It says, in the promise given to Abraham.
All right, I'll turn there right after we take a look at chapter 12.
Okay.
Really quickly. Chapter 12, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing. That's one way, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So we'll take a look at 13. There are other places where we can say that. 13, what are the verses?
Let's see, 13, I gotta find it again. 16 through 22, it says. It's referring to 16 through 22.
Good. Yeah, there's the blessing there repeated. It gets repeated several times. This doesn't have the reason, the purpose for it in quite the same way as chapter 12 does, the first reference.
Oh, okay.
So the shorthand version is, I will bless you and you will be a blessing. That's the easiest shorthand translation. So it's not just, I pick you, you're great, good luck. It's not just, I feel like arbitrarily selecting a group of people to carry something special. It's chosen for a purpose. And the purpose is to bless all of God's children throughout the world. And all the peoples will be blessed. And so the promise that's being carried by Abraham is never sort of self-referential. The prophets will call the people back to this from time to time and say, hey, look, you're not that this is not just for you. You're supposed to be this this incredible light that the nations will come and stream to, so that they can be blessed, so that they can be in right relationship with God and with one another, and so on and so forth. So fast forward to Solomon, with the people of Judah and Israel more numerous than the sand on the seashore, the fulfillment at some level, or at least a hearkening back to, an allusion to this promise with Abraham. A question that I think we're supposed to ask ourselves is, are the peoples of the world being blessed because of the people of Judah and Israel, because of Solomon? Is the telos being met? And it's probably too early to say. At the same time, you know where the story goes. So, does it stay positive? Meh. Probably not. This is the golden age, though. At the same time, again, there's no question that the narrator also knows. Under Solomon, this is the high point.
But I thought your question was, why Abraham? Why the Jewish people?
That is the question. What's the answer?
I don't see an answer to that in that part of Genesis.
To be a blessing. That's why. The why is so that they will bless others.
Oh, okay.
I will bless you so that you will be a blessing. God does not select a group of people so that they can rise above other people. God does not say, I'm going to make you all wonderful because Abraham happened to be faithful. And by the way, Abraham wasn't faithful. It was, it's grace ultimately that calls Abraham. And the verdict ends up being that God has attempted to work through one particular family in order to carry out a plan of the shorthand is blessing for the whole universe, for the whole created world, for all of God's children. And so anytime we see the blessing at some level being bestowed upon the people of Judah and Israel, or upon Abraham's children, or however we want to look at it, the question that I think we have to draw back to is, okay, God's held up part of God's end of the deal. What are the people doing with that end of the deal? And we can ask ourselves that question all the time too. Anytime we consider ourselves blessed, what are we doing with it? Is it that we are being a blessing to others? Are we caring for the promise, the covenant that God has made with Abraham, and through Abraham with Abraham's children? It'll just have to be a rhetorical question here at 11 o'clock. Go ahead, Louise.
I just flipped over to the message because I wanted to see how that said. And actually, it's quite beautiful. I'll make you a great nation and bless you. I'll make you famous. You'll be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you and curse you. No, and those who curse you, I'll curse. And then this is the last line I love. And all the families of the earth will be blessed through you.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that brings it home to my family reaching to another family, right?
Yep.
All the peoples of the earth is hard for me to manage, but if I can manage my family to one other, that's doing something.
Very good. Very good. We can, it's after 11, so I won't do it, but we can go a lot farther into how then this promise gets carried through various other covenants and times and periods, including the new covenant, including how we understand this to be at play in the conversations about who Jesus is and what Jesus does. That's all, that could be fun homework for everybody. But at its root, I think that's the great line. Every family is going to be blessed through the fulfillment of this promise to Abraham. And so here is some fulfillment. What's happening to the families of the earth. Good. All right, y'all are wonderful. Good studying, good thought processes, great questions and good responses. Such a great thing for me to be with you all, and I'm thankful for you. say our prayers and get you about the rest of your Wednesday. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
With you.
Let's pray. God, we give you thanks for this great day, for the bestowing of a blessing upon us, a blessing that you give through each of us, by each of us in this community as we gather, and especially by giving us the gift of your Spirit to be with us and to guide us into wisdom and understanding, into right action, into that which accords with your will and with your love. We pray for wisdom and discernment, that we might know you and your love, that we might embrace you and your love, even as we are being embraced by you and your love. And that as you promised to Abraham, that you promised to us also, that we who find ourselves wrapped in this love will also find ways to bless others in your name, to love others in your name. Help us to see those opportunities and to take advantage of them today as our lives continue from this moment and forevermore. We offer you our prayers for the world around us, for our families, friends, and neighbors, for those who are strangers to us, but whom we still call neighbors and are known to you, are part of your human family, for the created world. We pray for those who are sick, and those who care for them. We pray for the leaders of this and every nation, that they too might be given wisdom to make right decisions for the welfare of your children, and especially those who are most vulnerable. And we pray in the words that your Son, our Savior Christ, taught us as we say together, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Okay.